America, bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway. Our lead story this morning, breaking out of China, big COVID outbreak in the Guangdong province, which is where they have a lot of manufacturing and shipping and more than 100 new cases. China has mainly escaped the devastating impact of the virus it unleashed upon the world, probably accidentally from a lab in Wuhan, and covered it up. But they welded people into apartments, they shut it down, they lied to the world, and they managed to miss most of the bullet that came from that, hit the rest of the world with 5 million dead or something like that. I can't remember how many people are dead. We have a obviously limited scope of view into China, but we'll follow that story as much as we can. At home here in the United States Senate acted in a bipartisan fashion yesterday to pass a $250 billion bill to curtail China's economic and military ambitions. It's called the United States Innovation and Competition Act. It provides $50 billion in immediate funding to U.S. military businesses that produce microchips and the next generation of microchips. There's $300 million specifically to counter political influence by the malign agents of the Chinese Communist Party in the United States. The White House also stood up a new task force to address potential disruptions in the United States because of critical shortages, because of Chinese interference with our supply chain. The National Science Foundation is going to take in about $10 billion, actually $190 billion, is part of what the National Science Foundation will get. $53 billion goes immediately to the supply crunch, including new financing so that chip makers can produce more chips domestically. I think that's really going to help Arizona, where Taiwan Semiconductor, the world's largest semiconductor facility, is relocating a large part of production. There's also a $10 billion operation and authorization for 2 lunar lander contracts. Blue Origin is jumping up and down. That's the Bezos company that's he's going to take off up in a ride to the space later this summer. $15 billion for combating Chinese influence and disinformation online. That is needed and overdue. But that was the good news. Democrats and Republicans got together on that bill. Meanwhile, Joe Biden and Shelley Moore Capito, the senator from West Virginia who led Republican efforts to negotiate an infrastructure deal, well, that fell apart. The president won't give up on tax increases, and the Republicans won't accept tax increases, and so they went their own way. So what will happen? Nobody knows. There's some infrastructure that both sides would like to get done, but the Republicans aren't going to support that absent a deal on tax hikes and to get rid of tax hikes. And Joe Biden wants to raise tax hikes. In fact, there's a fairly long piece in the Wall Street Journal today. Biden's capital gains tax proposal puts estate planners to work. You bet it has, because they want to do away with stepped-up basis. Most people do not dispose of assets until they're dead, right? They make a will, and they say, give the house to Jane, and give my bank account to Joe, and that'll be that. And it's pretty much equal. You know, there's $100,000 in the bank, and the house is worth $100,000. Well, the house used to be worth $100,000 unless they changed the rules about stepped-up basis. Maybe they bought it for $10,000. It goes to $100,000. Well, it used to be, and still is to this very day, that if you die and it's worth $100,000, it's valued at $100,000 because you, quote, step up the basis from the time you bought it back in 1950 to the time it's sold after your death. Not Joe Biden. He wants to tax that. And he has some exemptions, but those exemptions haven't been passed yet. It's just the idea of doing away with it has a lot of senators, including a lot of Democratic senators. I can't see Chuck Schumer voting for this. Nevertheless, as the Wall Street Journal dictates, accountants all over the world are looking at what do we do about that. If Congress starts to tax appreciated assets at death, there will be an instant and powerful lobby of people trying to get the law changed immediately when power shifts. Well, that includes a lot of Democrats. If you start imposing capital gains on assets at death, people just rise up. Small business owners, small farmers, small timber owners, car wash owners, people who have a house that appreciated, those houses that you see for $1.5 million in Buckhead, Atlanta, they didn't cost $1.5 million 30 years ago when they were bought. They cost $200,000. So those owners are going to get screwed. Everything would have to be sold at death, and the government would take all the money. And most Americans object to that. Meanwhile, Joe Manchin has said, don't call me, I'll call you, to the Democrats. They're mad at him, but he's not the only one. The other ones are just sitting there in the conference caucuses saying nothing. My favorite story of the morning is that the FBI, once they got done trying to destroy Trump, once we got rid of Jim Comey and his gang, they actually went to work in 2018, and they came up with an amazing deal, and hats off to Christopher Wray and his entire team at the FBI. They developed a phone under Operation Trojan Seal. They went and they got a phone, and they sold this phone to organized crime all over the world. And this phone had it was disguised as a calculator, and you punched in a code, and there was a phone. And the phone was encrypted, so all the bad guys thought. Well, the FBI and their law enforcement brothers and sisters around the world intercepted 20 million messages in 45 languages. And this week they arrested 800 people, most of them in the last 2 days, in a dozen countries. And they did so for money laundering, for drugs, for weapons, for human trafficking, all of the high-tech covert criminals of those who bought this Anom phone, A-N-O-M. Well, they're screwed. The FBI and Interpol and the Australian police and the Brit police, etc., they had even the Mexican Sinaloa cartel and other criminal groups were using it. Someone in each organization is really going to get whacked because they're the guys that go, hey, boss, I got a new phone. It's really terrific. We should get them for everybody. And the FBI paid an informant in a previously indicted encryption system to develop a new one, and they went out and sold it. 12,000 Anom devices were sold. I mean, they were sold to 300 criminal syndicates and on a 6-month subscription for $1,700 in the United States. Can you imagine Joey Bag of Donuts, who got sold this by his nephew, Sammy, said, hey, Uncle Joey, I got a brand new phone. It's perfect. Nobody will know anything about us. And Joey said, I don't know. I like my Apple phone. Tim Cook doesn't work with the feds. He said, oh, no, this is better. Everything's encrypted. So Uncle Joey Donuts bought it, and Joey Donuts is now looking for Sammy because everything that they've done for the last 18 months has been, I mean, it's 16 different countries, Australia, Finland, Sweden, Colombia, the UK, Netherlands. They all got this thing. And all of these people, the 800 arrests occurred in 16 countries, 700 house searches, 250 firearms, 55 luxury vehicles, the yacht's gone, 48 million in several currencies. That's just the beginning. 9,000 law enforcement officers around the world searched 700 locations in the last 48 hours. 2 tons of synthetic drugs, et cetera. It's not what they've got. It's how many people they can convict because they got all their messages. It's a pretty wild deal. Well done, FBI. Boo to the IRS. The IRS was breached, and the tax information of a score of wealthy Americans was leaked. Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, it's none of our business. It's highly illegal to do that. You have the expectation of privacy in your taxes, and if you think it's a good idea, they can do it to you too. This was clearly an effort to embarrass wealthy people who paid low taxes because tax avoidance is legal, because they bought assets that they haven't purchased yet, because they have stock that they haven't turned in. It's a complete and utter nightmare. I wouldn't give a dime to the IRS for years. If they can't secure the tax information of Americans, they ought not to be trusted with the tax information of Americans. I'm not going to go over the details. ProPublica wants us all to pay attention and say, aren't we outraged? No, I'm outraged that the government has a tax agency that leaks like that. Just like under President Obama, they had a tax agency that went after Tea Party groups and went after ordinary patriotic Americans who fly the flag. And yes, I know there's a lefty out there who thinks the flag means you're a white racist. Well, that's not true. But what is true that the IRS should not leak. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. It's Hugh Hewitt. Joined now by Leland Vittert. Now, you know Leland from Fox News, or he used to. He's no longer there. He's now at News Nation, which is the new kid on the block in cable news. Hello, Leland. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hugh, good morning.
Now, you're a Medill guy. This makes me very upset that you snuck in, and you're like Guy Benson. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and I'm worried about it. Del Weber, what year did you get out of Northwestern?
It's funny you bring up Guy Benson. We were in the same class. We know each other because I dated a friend of his.
Oh, my gosh. What sorority was the friend in?
Alpha Phi.
I asked because my daughter was also in that class, and that's why I'm worried that you were dating some. You better not have been mean to my daughter, Leland. It'll be be a terrible thing. She's married to a fighter pilot, so he can strafe you. Leland, what did you do after Northwestern?
Spent some time bouncing around the local news markets in Orlando, Florida, where you covered more crazy things in a year than you did most places in your entire career. As a buddy of mine used to say, without Central Florida, the National Enquirer publishes monthly. So got experience there. And then Denver, Colorado, which was a great time in my life, and headed overseas for Fox, which was a wonderful opportunity. Came back and covered the White House, got to know your son a little bit back in D.C., great place, and now came over to News Nation to help launch our new project and see what we can do.
Now, the reason I found Leland at the new place is because the aforementioned son said, "Hey, Michael Waltz, who he works for, is going to be on News Nation." I literally said, "What is News Nation?" And he said, "Oh, it's a new news channel." And I said, "Okay, I'll watch that." And I turned it on, and there you were. And I'd seen you on Fox, but I didn't know you were a foreign correspondent, done some war zone stuff, and you conducted two very competent interviews, and so I started tracking you down. So first, Leland, tell us about News Nation. Where people can find it, what its objective is, where it fits in the sort of lineup of cable stations.
Well, we're going back to an old-fashioned concept, which is real journalism, unbiased reporting, and then let the facts take the viewer where they view things, and not rather than tell people what to think or what our views of things are, is we're going to tell them what's happening. And as you pointed out in the interviews that I did, appreciate your kind words, but ask the tough questions of both sides. And I've had sort of the unique position in my old job of getting both sides from both sides. President Trump both hailed me on Twitter and trashed me on Twitter, and I've had Democrats take the same view of me on both sides. It tells you you're doing something right in that sense. News Nation's owned by Nexstar. We're the largest owner of local television stations in the country. Have about 200 stations around the country, sort of an unprecedented amount of journalists. I think it's 5,500 journalists work for the company. And they've bought what was WGN, so the same place you watch Blue Bloods or those types of reruns. It will now migrate over the next 18 months into a 24-hour news channel. And we're different in a lot of ways. The other way we're different is we're based in the Midwest. I'm from the Midwest, from America's heartland. And at least growing up, people I grow up with and the people that I still know from back home, they don't care who's dunking on who on Twitter. They don't really care what the latest argument is over Joe Manchin in what he said about the filibuster or H.R. 1 back in Washington. They really care about these sort of basic issues. Are their kids safe? What's the cost of gasoline? Are their kids going to have a better life than they do? Are they safe from threats around the world? And these are the kind of basic questions we're going to report on.
Now, Leland, you were doing that on the weekend when I saw you. You were talking about the cyber attacks, and cyber attacks do concern Americans because their money might go away someday, or they might have to stand in a gas line. So I thought those were two good interviews. They were fair to both people. You did ask tough questions of both people. My question is, what will they do in the evening? Will they switch over to opinion broadcasting, or will they stick with straight news at night?
Well, we're already straight news at night. I think you saw me on, it would have been Friday night at about 6 o'clock Central Time, so 7 o'clock Eastern. And then that's Joe Donovan's show. And then we have News Nation Prime that comes in after that, which is also a straight news program. Last night was reporting on the Wuhan virus, Wuhan lab leak theory, and where this virus came from. So I think we've pretty established what we are. And if you think about it, if you come home late at night at 8 or 9 o'clock, there's lots of opinion shows and people who do great jobs. My old colleagues at Fox, still very good friends, do wonderful jobs. And no matter where you are on the ideological spectrum, there is somebody out there who will tell you all the things that you agree with and why the other side's wrong. There's not really a space for sitting down and not quite knowing where your anchor views things. And
now, I've so long waited for just the news. I think just the news is what a lot of people want, and I know where to get my opinion. I know I like to read my opinion primarily, but I want just the news, and I want it fast, et cetera. So is News Nation going to do that 24/7 7 days a week?
Correct.
That's redundant. That is great. Now, tell me, you said you're a Midwesterner. Now, the heart of the Midwest is in Ohio. Where are you from originally?
Just down the rivers in St. Louis.
All right, Missouri counts as Midwest. Now, you don't know anything about college football because you went to Northwestern. Do they do sports at News Nation?
I don't know anything about sports.
Okay, that's good too. You lack the sports gene. It's, if you're coming from Northwestern, I sort of assume that. When you went abroad, where did Fox send you abroad? What areas of the world have you covered up close and personal?
Well, you're nice to ask about that, and I'll walk down memory lane a little bit. I started off in Israel in 2010 when no one wanted the job. I was 27 years old, and President Obama had declared peace. So, he'd gone to Cairo and given a speech, and Hillary was going to come tell the Israelis and Palestinians what was up. And then 6 months later, the Arab Spring kicked off. So I spent time in Egypt and did Mubarak's demise, then Libya for the civil war there for a couple of months.
Garden spot. All right, Libya.
Yes, yeah. All the tourists, all the great tourist hotspots. Obviously, some time in the Gulf, covered the Syrian civil war, Turkey, and then my last rotation was through Ukraine when the Russians tried out their hybrid warfare in the east.
No, I'm not shining you on here. That's actually a fairly impressive string of places to report from. How did you couldn't have been in Syria. I gather you were in Lebanon maybe or in Israel covering.
Well, we were in Israel, and occasionally we may have ventured other places. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, do leave it at that. That's an interesting set of backgrounds. In Ukraine, were you there for the Little Green Men period? You made some reference to that.
I was. I had some up close and personal meetings with the Little Green Men. They were not always so pleasant. It was difficult to place their accent, either St. Petersburg or Moscow Center. What was interesting to me is how a number of the Little Green Men I encountered spoke perfect American English, and you had to kind of wonder where they were trained because they were clearly not the Ukrainian villagers that they purported to be.
So, Leland, you were talking to Michael Waltz, and you threw in there the fact that, well, of course, one of the reactions there was to Russia was the decimation of 300 Russian mercs in Syria when they came over the hill at American troops. That is not something that is widely known. That's actually what piqued my curiosity about you. That's a fun fact to know and tell in the middle of a conversation about Russian interference and malign interference around the world. How do you prep? How do you stay smart?
Well, I spent a lot of time listening to the Hugh Hewitt radio show, and then
that's the right answer. Yeah, that's the right answer. But after that,
I think I'm an old-fashioned reporter, and I got that fact from some of the folks over at the Pentagon that I used to work with and report on, I should say. But what I think this brings up is the idea of sort of if you put out the facts, which is what we did in that interview. Sometimes it leads you to a little different view of things than the spin. And we were talking to Michael Waltz about President Trump's dealings with Vladimir Putin, which is easy to say, hey, Trump gave Putin a free pass and told him that he believed him rather than the intelligence communities, and he was soft on this and soft on that. And then you look at the fact that Donald Trump arguably has killed more Russians in his presidency than any president since Ronald Reagan, and you get a little bit more nuanced view. And to my mind, sort of the old-fashioned reporting that I've gone through and other people at our network have gone through, that background gives you a little bit different perspective to come at these interviews and these situations with.
So, Leland, how do people find News Nation and the rundown and where they can find it, et cetera? What's the website for it?
Well, we're working on that. It's newsnationnow.com. Click on Channel Finder. You can put in your zip code. Right now, we're on 4 hours a night, so we start at 6 p.m. Eastern. We go to 10 p.m. Eastern. And this is, in the words of our CEO, the last great adventure in television, and give us a shot. We're still the new kid on the block, as you pointed out, so things are looking up and getting better, but we're trying.
Now, when you say newsnation.com, that will tell you where to find a channel finder. If you've got one of the magic things that I do, you just have the little blue dot and you say News Nation and up you came. And so many people in America don't have the little blue dot and they'll go to Channel Finder. Is it everywhere in the United States? Have you got coverage geographically somewhere everywhere in the United States?
We're in about 85 million homes. So we're in probably, I think it changes but about 80% of cable households. So if you have cable, we most likely have you most likely have us. What's interesting is that we've morphed or are morphing from a rerun station to a news station. we're moving on the channel dial. So find us newsnationnow.com and click on Channel Finder, and you can figure out where we're at. And then you can add us to favorites or what all these new. And we're on YouTube TV, which is how my parents watch us. So we're around.
Well, this is, it's terrific. I assume they are drafting young people at the beginning of their career like you, and that is terrific. Who's your boss again? That is terrific. That whatever they're doing is terrific. I'm glad they're doing this because 24/7 news, that is the goal, 24/7 news?
That is the goal, and you'll appreciate this as somebody who also has a business background, Hugh, is that we're backed by a company that does $6 billion a year in revenue and $2 billion a year in EBITDA. And they've dedicated themselves to this project, in the words of the CEO, is the last great adventure in broadcasting. So unlike a number of the other startups that are sort of living hand to mouth, we've got this enormous juggernaut of cash flow behind us. And they're willing to spend money on good journalism. I'm heading out on Sunday to go over to Switzerland to cover the Biden-Putin summit, so we'll be there with them and in trying to really put boots on the ground and do, rather than simply sit around and have a panel talk about who's dunking on who, go out and do real reporting.
Oh, it will be an immediate hit with me. Great to make your acquaintance, Leland Vittert. Sorry to hear you're a Wildcat, but we will continue to have you back. Good luck traveling over there. Hope they give you an exclusive. I hope you stay centered right in the middle. Maybe lean a little center right, center left, but just stay right in the middle doing the news because we need a cable news station that is actually a cable news station. Leland Vittert, thank you. Honestly, I just saw him for the first time, and I'd seen him on Fox, but I didn't know about News Nation until this past weekend. So I tracked him down, and that is terrific. Because honestly, I don't know if you're like me. I want a news station like CNN was a long time ago. I mean, I like watching Tucker and Sean and Laura. I like watching a bunch of different shows, and of course, I'm in the opinion business as well as the news business, and the radio has always been a mixture of both. But when you want straight news, you want straight news. Just tell me what's going on, where it's happening, and that's increasingly rare. Back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined by Brian Wesbury of First Trust Portfolio in Chicago. Brian is our favorite economist. Brian, I was just talking to New York Times columnist Ross Douthat about, despite the grimness of the death total, the pandemic had a couple of upsides. One was transparency of the education system. I think that will lead to reform. Another was the great dispersion of Americans throughout the United States. What are the long-term consequences? You think big and you think long about big stuff. What are the consequences of what happened in the last year or 16 months where Americans just simply moved to places they had not moved to before?
Right. What's interesting is being an employer, when you call everybody back to the office, to have somebody say, well, I don't live there anymore. So, I mean, there's going to be some displacement. Some people that are at the time, the idea felt really good. And then because now I can work, remotely. But now all of a sudden everybody wants me back in the office, visiting them face to face. And I don't want to do that anymore. So I think we're going to have more retirement. I think we will have people changing careers. I think we're going to have some of that. And then I also think we will have some real, true remote work. And so one of the things, this happened in World War II. We learned how to mass produce. I mean, we already had assembly lines, right? But we had learned how to mass produce things, and then we shifted from war items to regular consumer items, and productivity increased. This time we learned how to use the cloud, we learned how to use video, we learned how to use communications in a different way. So I do believe productivity will increase because of that. But it's not, and all I'm saying is it won't be as clear cut as some people think. We just moved all over the country and that's the way it's going to work. In the end, you have to be in the office. So I believe, anyway. I think.
Let me ask you about the the pod effect of when seeds of entrepreneurship sort of spread out from Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and New York to places like Boise and Austin. It was happening already. I think it dramatically accelerated. I think, for example, of Tennessee, where a lot of the pods landed in Nashville, a bunch of them landed in Knoxville. I think of North Carolina, which already had some pretty dynamic research centers. Have you got any stats on whether or not these folks are staying and opening businesses there and satellite offices?
Yeah, not yet, Hugh. I mean, there is no doubt economic growth in Florida, in Tennessee, in Texas exceeded that of Illinois, New York, California. I mean, we just saw New York, Illinois. I mean, we're the North and the high tax red states are losing, congressmen and women votes. We're losing income and income taxes, and it's all going south. And I think along with that is entrepreneurship as well. So, no doubt, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, others, Wyoming are all going to win. But we just don't have the data to prove all of that yet.
All right. Now, let me ask you, while we can, about semiconductors. Big story today about China trying to be nice to people. Taiwan Semiconductor is building a plant in Arizona. How important is it to get semiconductor production back to the United States, Brian Wesbury?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at it strategically, militarily, how it's essential that we produce semiconductors. The biggest problem I have with what we did yesterday, the Senate passed a $250 billion bill. It almost like was a footnote. I mean,
yes,
if you care about semiconductors, but in terms of front page of the news, it's like a footnote. $250 billion. It doesn't mean anything. We still need to talk about modern monetary theory at some point, but
we need a longer segment for that. I'm going to do that next week. We're going to get you into 33 because that's not a 7-minute segment, Brian.
No, I agree. But let me say we are trying to compete with China. Totally understand that. But it seems to me that today we've decided we're going to compete with China by being like China. I mean, how if the government is going to fund research, if the government is going to help build chip plants, that's Chinese. That's communism. That's government-run business. And we were ahead of China for forever in semiconductors until we hit the brick wall of high corporate tax rates, big government spending, lots of regulation, and as a result, we fell behind. And so now, the government says, see, I killed this business, shut down the economy, crushed semiconductors in the supply chain, overtaxed them, all of those things, and now we're going to come in and rescue them and be in control. We're acting communist to beat the communist. I think it's totally wrong.
And when we come back, it is also because we print money with abandon and we don't mind that the friction costs of funneling money through this National Science Foundation are relatively high to simply the private sector. Brian, always a pleasure. Next week, Modern Monetary Theory. We're not going to warn anyone that will scare them off. It's actually very important. Follow him on Twitter at Wesbury, no T, Wesbury. Follow me the next hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Good morning, Glory America. Bonjour. Hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway. Thank you for listening to me. Got a new guest on the show, Congressman Scott Franklin, who serves on the House Armed Services Committee from the 15th CD in Florida, which is right smack in the heart of my Tampa and Sarasota signals. I get lots of Lakeland, Florida calls all the time, Congressman. Welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
Oh, great. Good morning, Hugh. It's a pleasure to be with you here this morning.
Now, I read in your bio, you're a naval aviator, and just this Saturday I was having a hamburger in Virginia, and Bob Hurricane Yakeley walks up to me because I had my son-in-law's squadron hat on, and he wanted to talk to me about naval aviation, about which I know nothing. What's your call sign, Congressman?
Well, I had a few over the years. Frankie was one that stuck the most, but usually it's the things that embarrass you the most that you don't want to have stick around as call signs. So there were a few that I'll leave at the classified level.
I heard that. That's why I never tell anyone my son-in-law's call sign. So, Congressman, talk to me a little bit about the district before we dive into the article you wrote about China. I do want to know the 15th has got Lakeland and some of Tampa, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Really, the 15th district straddles I-4, which is kind of the heart of Central Florida between Tampa and Orlando, and ranges from Riverview and Hillsborough County through Brandon, Plant City, Lakeland, and on up to Claremont and Groveland and Lake County. It's really one of the fastest growing parts of Florida.
Well, it's got to be, you're going to run into redistricting, and obviously Florida's picking up one or two seats. You're going to have to change your boundaries. How closely are you wired into that process?
Well, we're watching it closely. We actually had assumed Florida was going to be getting two with the growth that we've had. We're going to be picking up one seat, and there's a lot of thought that seat may end up coming somewhere along the I-4 corridor just because of the growth. Our current district is highly overpopulated compared to the size of what districts are going to be. So we know it's going to change. We just don't know how that'll shape up yet, but expect to find out over the next several months.
Well, keep us posted on that. I want to make sure that everyone knows that you're doing a good job for that part. For Florida's an enormously diverse state. I keep telling people they have no idea. It's like the United States and within one state. Congressman, this morning in the New York Times, there's a story. China's leader wants a lovable country. That doesn't mean he's making nice. General Secretary Xi had a big conference where he told all the Communist Party officials last week that they've got to be nicer. I think that is really a difficult thing to do when, as you point out in your Real Clear Defense article, they're engaged in a genocide.
Well, it's definitely hypocrisy on their part, and I would hope that that'd be the language they would be using, but they need to back it up with actions, because really their repression of the Uyghur Muslims is one of the most repugnant human rights abuses we've seen in modern history. And, any country that wants to step up and consider themselves a responsible actor on the world stage needs to treat its people well.
There is no such thing as genocide in Xinjiang, according to their foreign minister, Wang Yi. How do you respond to that, Congressman?
Well, I don't think the Uyghurs would see it that way. There are all sorts of stories there that need to be dived into further. But they've got people locked up in concentration camps. They use sterilization. There's genocide. Just a tremendous range of human rights abuses that really Americans need to be wiser about, considering the amount of trade we do with China and the respect that they seem to be having on the world stage. It's just not the way people should treat their own citizens.
There are very easy steps they could take. For example, they could open the camps where the Uyghurs are collected for re-education to the Red Cross. They could also allow people into the Wuhan lab for virology to do an independent investigation, not one corrupted by Tedros. Are there steps that you've laid out to allow them back into the community of nations?
Well, this bill that I've introduced really is just a further strengthening of language that was introduced into the Defense Authorization Act in 2019. Just a number of measures that China would need to do to step up to prove that they're responsible players. And, part of that was to stop building these artificial land masses in the South China Sea and then arming those. They need to stop that. They need to demonstrate a pattern of responsible behavior. They need to acknowledge the genocide. Denying its existence isn't a step in the right direction, but they need to reverse course on the way they've been treating the Uyghurs for certain.
Now, Congressman Franklin, when anyone steps up and starts talking, as you do, about the China record on human rights and aggression against its neighbors and its own people, they typically come in for troll land. I mean, you get bombarded by the Chinese, the PRC-based trolls. Has that happened to you yet?
It hasn't yet, but I'm sure it will. Yeah, that's just part of doing business.
And what do you say to your Chinese American constituents who are afraid about anti-Asian discrimination? I've discussed this with Secretary Pompeo. He is always careful to say we've got to be on guard against that in the United States, but that doesn't mean, the risk of that does not mean we can be silent about the depredations of the Chinese Communist Party.
No, and that's where I think the key distinction needs to be made. This is not an issue with the Chinese people. It's the issue with the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese people need to know that we stand with them. We respect their right to freedom, and they should demand more from their government.
Now, Congressman, how many people have co-signed on your bill? Have you got any Democrats?
We're working on that. This has kind of come along when we've been out of D.C., and I'm hoping when we get back up there this next week, I'll get an opportunity to start speaking with more. It's been a challenging environment to work even on our own side of the aisle with the COVID restrictions and lockdowns we've had without the ability to work with our our fellow colleagues. But that seems to be loosening up a little now in Washington, and I'm hoping when we arrive back there next week, we'll see that things are much improved.
Now, the Senate passed the $250 billion China Competitive Act yesterday. Isn't that a likely vehicle to which we could attach some pretty strong sanctions, some pretty strong measurements of China behavior to?
It is, and I look forward to diving deeper into that legislation. What I'm introducing here is just by virtue of my being on the Armed Services Committee, but across all the spectrums of our government, anywhere that we have interaction with the Chinese, we've got opportunities for improvement. And I think the COVID pandemic has revealed a lot of different ways in which we've become too dependent upon the Chinese, whether it's our food supply, medical supply, drugs, technology manufacturing. I think it's time for a wake-up call for us to sit back, or sit up and look at how we have become so dependent and take steps to lessen that dependence.
Now, Congressman Franklin, I'm asking every elected that I can to think about what will happen when Xi Jinping orders the hostile takeover of Taiwan, whether by naval invasion, by airplane, by cadres on the island. And Senator Cotton said yesterday we need to use whatever force is necessary, and you shoot at air transports if they're invading. What do you think? Do we use force if they make a move against Taiwan, as many people expect, not just 5 years down the line, but maybe right after the Winter Olympics in 2022?
Well, Taiwan is a very critical ally of ours. I think it would be reprehensible action. I wouldn't speculate as to what our military response would be, but I would say that this is exactly why we need to be taking every step we can now to ensure something like that doesn't take place.
Now, when you were an aviator, Congressman, were you ever based out of Japan on any of the carriers that are in Yosaka or any of those places, Yakuza, whatever they're called?
No, I was never a Westpac sailor. I was always North Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Arabian Gulf.
Well, when you were back at the Pentagon or going, did anyone ever talk about the Chinese Air Force and whether or not they are able to go plane on plane against the United States?
Traditionally, they have not. We've always, at least in the years that I served on active duty, the Chinese were there. There was a potential adversary that could be a threat, but we always viewed them as one that would sort of rip off and steal their way to the top. So as long as we were continuing to advance our technology and try to safeguard our secrets, we'd be a step ahead of them. But, unfortunately, over the last generation, as we've been required to force our military emphasis on the Middle East and counterterrorism, the Chinese have made significant strides in closing the gap. And in my short time in Congress so far and being involved in armed services, I've had a chance to see just the steps that they've taken. And they are a serious potential adversary for us now, one we need to take very seriously. And I think that's why we need to continue re-strengthening our military, refocusing some of the efforts that we've done away from the terrorism threat. It's still there. We can't neglect it, but we've got to definitely start looking for that great power competition and closing the gap against both the Russians and the Chinese.
Last question, Congressman Scott Franklin. Thank you for joining me. Keep coming back. You're on Armed Services with Mike Gallagher. He's a really great guy, except for his Green Bay Packers apologism. He will not answer why they didn't go for it on fourth down. He wants to be in a war game, one of the Pentagon's war games about China, because he wants to see how we will respond to a move against Taiwan. Would you join such an exercise as well? Maybe Congress ought to order one up from a private sector provider to see what happens.
I would love to participate in that, and I'm studying the results of previous war games that we've had, and interested to see how those continue to develop. It's an area we've got to pay very close attention to.
I'd love to see the Armed Services Committee go through one. I think it would be a heck of an educational experience. In fact, I'd love to see every member of the House do one. I think it would open a lot of eyes. Congressman Franklin, thank you. Keep coming back. The great citizens of Florida, well served there from Tampa to Lakeland and beyond. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show. America, it's Hugh Hewitt. California's going to have a recall. Kevin Faulconer wants to be the next governor. He joins me now, the former mayor of San Diego. Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Hugh, good morning. It's great to be back with you. Thank you.
Would you give us an update on where we stand on dates and deadlines and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I'll tell you, we have a lot of, as usual, for Governor Newsom out here, a lot of unclarity. They have not set the recall election date yet. Our best guess, Hugh, is that it's going to be in November. And in the meantime, as I think, Newsom has been touting for a while that, in June 15th, he was going to fully reopen the state. But as we learned just last Friday, he's decided he's going to keep the state of emergency. And, once again, it's Newsom changing his mind, showing his true colors to try to retain power at any cost out here.
Now, the amazing thing to people who live across the United States, they know generally there will be a recall, such as took Gray Davis out and put Arnold in. It's an unusual circumstance. But what is different now from then is not being able to know when the election is. How do they get away with that, Mayor Faulconer?
Well, look, you hit the nail on the head. And what you saw is the democratically controlled legislature a year or so ago decided to change the rules. And so they put in all this extra time, Hugh, and you could, it's time to, quote, take your name off the signature list and all this kind of other rigmarole. So, look, at some point, they know they have a deadline. It's actually coming up. Our best guess is, as I said, that they're going to set it for November. But, for us, it doesn't matter. I will tell you, Hugh, Californians are angry. They are frustrated. That's why 2 million Californians signed this recall petition for a governor that is failing, and not just failing on the pandemic, Hugh, but really failing on all of the major issues out here in California in terms of homelessness, affordability, rising crime. So, look, we're ready. We're ready for the elections tomorrow. And as soon as they set it, I think you're going to see Californians of all, walks of life, all political persuasions, who want to make a change at the top here in California and end one-party rule that we've had for a decade.
So have you begun a campaign, Kevin Faulconer?
We have indeed, and it's been great to see, Hugh. We're traveling all over the state. In fact, I'm going to be up in San Diego today, Orange County tonight, really taking that message of reform and taking that message of making sure that we can actually get the state back on track. We proposed one of the largest middle-class tax cuts in California history 2 weeks ago. We're leading this movement. We're leading this movement of reform and of change. Somebody who has the experience, been elected twice here in San Diego, a deep blue city and a deep blue state. That's what it takes to win when you focus on common sense in California. And you can get Republicans, Democrats, and independents to vote for some change because they want results. They're tired of what they're seeing out of Gavin Newsom.
Your Twitter handle is Kevin_Faulconer, and it's spelled, I got to do this for the Steelers fans, Faulconer, Kevin_Faulconer. Now, what about a website, though? Is it Kevin for the recall? What's the website they go to?
It's KevinFaulconer.com. A little bit about, obviously, the campaign, our issues, and how you can help out.
Now, the key will be to clear the field. Have you talked to the other Republicans who are considering running? Because I think Gavin will lose question one, should he be retained? And then it will be whoever comes in first wins, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's the specifics of the California recall. Look, I think we're going to have a lot of candidates here. We did last time in the last recall, as you remember, there was literally over 100 candidates. And so I think there's, that's just going to be what's going to happen again. But I think our job, obviously, in our campaign is to get out that, the fact that we actually have the experience, we've made the tough stands. What I did as mayor, I did not defund the police. I increased the budget by 7%. The only person, who has run that actually reduced homelessness in their city. It's exploding, Hugh, in virtually every other city here in California. So I think what we offer is somebody, again, with not just the experience, but somebody who has the political will, who can stand up, not worry about being politically correct, but just actually make the decisions. And when you do that, and look, I found that that's how you can win in a deep blue city like San Diego, and that's how you can take that message statewide. Because people who are tired of the rhetoric of Gavin Newsom and want somebody who's actually going to stand up, as I said, get some results. And I think the really big thing that we're seeing a lot of traction on out here right now, we have to reduce taxes in California, Hugh, because people are voting with their feet. They are leaving our state in record numbers because it's just too expensive.
Oh, Mayor, I'm a Virginian now, and I'm a Virginian. I loved California, but I wasn't going to pay the price out there, and I'm not alone. I know there are hundreds of thousands of people who have left. So kevinfaulconer.com. When we get a date, I will reset our debates. We were going to do debates at the Nixon Library, but we can't set them up till we have a date, Mayor. When are we going to get it? Is there a deadline for a date by which they must give us a date?
No, there's not. But it's if you start, doing the math on how many days they have to do X and Y, we're likely to have that date in a couple of weeks. So I'm ready. I'm looking forward to the debate, Hugh. So we're going to get it happening, my man.
All right. I will see you at the Nixon Library whenever we figure out and work backwards from it 2 or 3 times. Mayor Kevin Faulconer, maybe the next governor of the mess that is known as California. But Democrats are Democrats. It's in their DNA. Don't be clear. Don't be candid. Don't be forthright. Hide. I won't hide. I'll be back tomorrow, America, on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.